In this video, we're going to focus on the inner ear. And the inner ear consists of the cochlea, the vestibular apparatus, which is the semicircular canals and vestibule. So the inner ear provides a sense of hearing, which we find in the cochlea, and then this vestibule and semicircular canals, which both make up the vestibular apparatus, function in equilibrium. The inner ear consists of a number of chambers and canals in the temporal bone, and can be divided into two main divisions. You have your bony and membranous labyrinth. The bony labyrinth is the bony part that surrounds the membranous labyrinth. Basically, it's going to be the structure in the temporal bone, the hollowed out structure in the temporal bone, and bone being around it, the wall making up the bony labyrinth. And it consists of a fluid called perilymph. Inside the bony labyrinth, you have the membranous labyrinth, which contains a fluid called endolymph. So shown here, what you see in pink and in red is the membranous labyrinth that consists of endolymph. Around it's going to be your bony labyrinth, and in many areas you'll have the perilymph. So the membranous labyrinth lies within the bony labyrinth. The membranous labyrinth is shown here in dark blue. It contains a fluid called endolymph. So the bony and membranous labyrinth are divided into three areas. You have the semicircular canals, shown here, the vestibule, which is here, and the cochlea. Well, the semicircular canals and the vestibule are referred to as the vestibular apparatus. And these two function in the detection of head position as well as head movement or equilibrium, where your body basically is in space, or where your head is in space. The cochlea functions in hearing and detection of sound. For right now, we're going to focus on the vestibular apparatus, and then later on we'll look at the cochlea and how it functions to detect sound. So equilibrium is the ability of the body to maintain appropriate posture and balance. And there are two basic types of equilibrium. We have static equilibrium and we have dynamic equilibrium. Now, static equilibrium refers to the maintenance of the position of the body, mainly the head, relative to the force of gravity. And your vestibule is important in detecting this. The vestibule consists of two structures. It has the urticle and the saccule, as shown here. And we're referring to static equilibrium. This is where your head moves in a stationary position. It's kind of moving one side to another. You can tell where that is in space. Even without visual cues, the movement of fluid in the vestibule can allow your brain to know where your head is in space. It also detects a little bit of dynamic equilibrium in that it can detect acceleration, deacceleration, and the up and down movements. Moving vertically, for example, when you're in an elevator or you're skipping rope. Dynamic equilibrium refers to the maintenance of the body position in response to sudden movement, such as rotation. And the semicircular canals are going to provide a sense of rotational or angular movements. So it can help a person maintain balance when turning the head, spinning, or tumbling. When you look at the vestibule, it consists of two sac-like otolithic organs, the saccule and the urticle. So here's the urticle and here's the saccule. And these function to provide information about linear acceleration and head position. In the walls of each urticle and saccule is a sensory structure called the macula. Each macula consists of two kinds of cells. You have hair cells and you have supporting cells. So shown here are the hair cells, in which the hairs are embedded in this otolithic membrane. It has these otoliths to give it more density. And then this portion, which is the cellular portion that has a nucleus and organelles, is supported by cells called supporting cells. Hairs on these hair cells have numerous, 70 or more sterocilia, or microvilli, and one kinocilium, shown here, that extends beyond the serocilia. It helps to give these to support, and then when this otolithic membrane moves, it's going to cause these hairs to bend, and then that's going to be transduced into an electrical signal that's going to go to the brain in order for you to perceive movement of the head. The nerve that transmits these signals is the vestibular branch of the vestibular cochlear nerve, or cranial nerve number 8. Well, this otolithic membrane is a gelatinous glycoprotein layer that surrounds and floats directly over the hair cells. These contain small structures that are a combination of protein and calcium carbonate crystals, and refer to these as otoliths or ear stones. Oto means ear, lith means stone. You want to make sure you star this. Actually, writing on the surface of the otolithic membrane are these calcium carbonate crystals called otoliths. And these basically give an increase in mass to the membrane, this otolithic membrane. Now, why is this important? because as you turn your head, shown here, for example, going forward, gravity is going to cause this otolithic membrane to tilt in the direction of pull of gravity. As that otolithic membrane moves, it bends the hairs of the hair cells, which is then going to stimulate these hair cells to send action potentials to the brain to let the brain know where the head is turning. These action potentials are transmitted to the brain, the medulla, the cerebellum, via the vestibular branch of the vestibular cochlear nerve, which is cranial nerve number 8. And as it goes in, the cerebellum is going to be the primary site for equilibrium processing. And sensory information will then go from the medulla and the cerebellum to the thalamus and up to the cortex. You also have within the semicircular canals, you have these receptors that function in the detection of movement or dynamic equilibrium. Now these canals project in 3 different planes at nearly right angles to each other. The ampulla of each semicircular canal is shown here, and it's an enlargement of one of the ends of the canal and contains the cristae ampullaris. So we'll go a little bit further in and take a look at this. So here's the cristae ampullaris that you see here. Inside of that, where the ampulla is, the cristae ampullaris is the receptor for the movement, dynamic equilibrium, and it's made up of a cristae and cupula. So all of this is a cristae, and this cristae consists of a group of sensory hair cells and supporting cells, as shown here. The cupula is a gelatinous glycoprotein mass that covers the hair cells of the cristae, and basically this provides a higher density than the surrounding endolymph. Remember, endolymph is all through here and essentially rests above the receptor surfaces of these hair cells. So when you look at how semicircular canals work to maintain equilibrium, this fluid in here is normally stationary in each of the semicircular canals. And the semicircular canals are at angles to each other so that they can handle various movements. So for example, if you move your head forward, then this fluid in here, or these cells in here, get stimulated. To side, maybe this one, or to an angle would be this one. So they're at different angles, these semicircular canals. Well, whenever you move your head, the fluid tends to stay stationary, and you move your head through, and that fluid that's staying stationary bends the cupula with these hair cells. And the way that the hair cells get bent are going to send a signal to your brain to let your brain know where you're turning your head. However, if you're going in a spinning motion over and over and over again, such as this, that fluid that normally stays stationary with minor turns to the right and left, forward and back, can actually start to move. And when that fluid starts to move, and then you stop, well, the fluid continues to move and it continues to bend the hair cells, which sends signals to your brain that you're still moving when actually you're stationary, and that's when you see the person go off to the side and all after you've spun them over and over and over again. Vertigo is a feeling that you or in your environment is moving or spinning when there's no actual movement. It results in disturbances in the vestibular system. It could be structures of the inner ear, the vestibular nerve, the brainstem, cerebellum. As a result of disturbances of the vestibular system, there is going to be a conflict of signals being sent to the brain, and that's going to give you vertigo. For example, the visual input and the inner ear signals are at odds with each other. They're not the same. Vertigo can result from head injuries, tumor, infections of the inner ear. Alcohol can give you vertigo. Migraine headaches can give you vertigo. And those of you who have had this know that this is no fun to have vertigo. Nystagmus is an unintentional jittery movement of the eyes. You have this when the brain's control of eye movement is poor. It results in inability to look steadily at an object, and this can result from visual problems such as myopia or hyperopia. It can also be due to optic nerve damage, and this is where you see the eyes shaking back and forth very rapidly, and that can come and go.